I'm going to read first. So welcome to the September 24th, 2020 electronic meeting of the Environmental Commission. This meeting is in accordance with executive orders from the governor to affect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, there are 2 opportunities, please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. I'm going to repeat this. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16. However, this meeting will not be broadcast in lieu of a special city council meeting, but the recording will be available later on ATT channel 99, and you can also always watch it online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. That's spelled WATCHCTN, all lowercase. So when you make public commentary, please be patient. There is a delay of up to 30 seconds before the connection is established. So,
Hey, Steve, very briefly, at the last Energy Commission meeting, those phone numbers did not work for us for public comment.
Oh, thanks for jumping in, John.
I wrote down 2 numbers. I believe they're right. Shannon, I see shaking her head as well. If those numbers don't work, try these numbers. 206-332-9723 or 213-338-8477. I realize those aren't toll free and the area code is odd, but those numbers did not work for us.
Okay, yeah, I should have checked that. I've noticed that that's on the top of the meeting agenda.
Exactly, and they were on the top of ours as well.
However, my agenda says it's 206-332.
Oh, it is, okay.
Hey, Steve. What happened? But I started it, I ended it and started it back, and I'm letting everybody back in.
I called to order at 7, so we've had an interruption until 7:12. So could you start the roll call?
Yes.
Yeah, I think for the public comment, I'm going to right before the public comment periods, I'm going to re-mention those numbers.
Okay.
Okay.
Attendance. I'm getting messages from my team. Hang on. Okay. Commissioner Graham. Okay, absent. Commissioner Skinner. Commissioner Needham.
Here.
Awesome. Commissioner Smith, Councilmember Smith. Commissioner Slavic.
Here.
Commissioner Appel. Commissioner
Here.
Appel.
Apple. Either
Apple,
way,
I'm
not
sorry.
picky. No problem.
Okay. Commissioner Gibb Randall.
Here.
Awesome. Councilmember Bannister. Councilmember Bannister. Commissioner Collowart.
Yes, here.
Chairman Brown,
Present.
Commissioner Overpeck, Commissioner Mursky, Commissioner Mursky, Commissioner Mitchell,
Here.
Commissioner Buendia. Okay, and that's roll call.
Okay, I'm getting text messages from people.
They're trying to get in.
They haven't gotten the message. They have to log back in.
How do we get
So
that?
I'm writing to Chris and John Mursky. I'm writing to Chris and John Mursky.
Okay. You want me to send him an email?
I'm replying to his text message.
Okay.
It's probably a good idea though to do the email too, just because there may be others and that way you kind of cover your bases. People can look to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna send that to them now.
While we're waiting, I'll just take a second to thank Jerry and Paul and Rick for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
Thanks, Bob.
very much.
Welcome.
Happy to be here. Thanks for caring.
So, so Galen, have you sent the email out?
Yeah, I sent it. Let me send it to everyone.
Okay.
But I only sent it to John. Let me get everybody in there. Okay. I just sent it to the whole commission.
Okay, good. So it looks like we're ready to start. We can wait for people to trickle in.
Okay, here's John.
Thanks, Galen.
You're welcome. My apologies for that snafu.
It's all right.
Okay. Yep. And I don't expect either of the two council members nor Gabby Buendia. So it looks like I wasn't sure about Chris, so I sent him a text message.
I think he said something about he was going to be late.
Okay. So it looks like we're ready to restart. Okay, Galen?
Okay. Okay. We're going to go back and do the roll call again.
I think we should.
Okay. Commissioner Graham. Commissioner Skinner. Commissioner Needham.
Here.
Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Smith. Commissioner Slavic.
Here.
Commissioner Apple.
Here.
Commissioner Gibb Randall.
Here.
Councilmember Bannister. Councilmember Bannister. Commissioner Collywart.
Here.
Chairman Brown.
Present.
Commissioner Overpeck. Commissioner Overpeck.
He sent an email saying he wasn't going to be able to join us tonight.
Okay. All righty. Commissioner Mursky.
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell.
Here.
Commissioner Buendia. And that's our roll call.
Do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do have a quorum.
Okay, thanks, Galen. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. It's pretty spare this month. We have the special presentations. Are there any suggestions to specifically add something to the agenda for any of these categories? Okay, then. I don't see any hands raised, so I'm going to say I'm going to ask for a motion to accept the agenda as written. Bob Needham.
Second.
John Mursky seconded. All who approve the agenda say aye.
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 All who, any no votes? Okay, it passed unanimously. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes, the draft minutes? Okay, are there any, do I have a motion to accept the minutes as written?
So I just want to mention, I meant some minor changes because there was one reference to my position as vice president, and I think it's really vice chair. So if you got those, Galen, then that's good. It's just minor.
You know what? I need to change that verbiage on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's minor.
Okay.
Otherwise, good.
Okay,
So I move to approve the minutes as amended with the edits recommended by Rita. I sent in a few minor ones myself too. So moved then.
okay. John Kellerworth seconds it. All who approve the minutes from the last meeting, say aye.
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 Okay, any no's? No, I hear no votes, so the minutes from the August 27th meeting pass with unanimously. So let's move on to the special presentations. The first one we have is with Jerry Hancock with the floodplain management overlay district proposal. So Jerry, you've got the wheel.
All right, well, let me share my screen. Can you let me share my screen, Galen?
Oh, I think you would have to share that. Oh, whoa. Hang on. I'll make you a co-host. I'm sorry. Co-host. Bam. You got it, Jerry? It should be a little box on the bottom.
I'm going to do that again. There we go. You should be seeing my screen now. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I am Jerry Hancock. I'm the city's stormwater and floodplain programs coordinator. And we're going to be talking about the proposed floodplain management overlay district. Let me figure out how to advance this. There we go. So we'll start out with a couple terms that I'll be using throughout the presentation. The floodplain is split into two parts, the floodway and the flood fringe. The floodway, where water flows with a destructive force. The flood fringe, water just kind of piles up. The whole thing is referred to as the 1% annual chance floodplain. That's what people used to refer to as the 100 year. Doesn't mean it happens every 100 years. It's 1% chance every year. The elevation of the floodplain is referred to as the base flood elevation. And I may refer to that as the BFE. And I'll also be talking about the 0.2% annual chance floodplain, which used to be called the 500 year. So what are some examples of floodplain management? So maps information services, like we have our flood maps or the FEMA maps. We have in our own product specific to Ann Arbor that we have out online, and it keep things like elevation certificates and letters of map amendment and revisions on there. Development review, I review site plans and building plans for compliance with the flood resistant construction standards of the building code and the UDC, the Unified Development Code. Our stormwater management reviews that we do of these developments are partially for the purpose of flood control. We do hazard mitigation planning. I'll talk a little bit about that later. We do flood mitigation, is where you're removing structures. I've received a couple different grants. People kind of know that the one site as the fish park, there used to be a house there. We tore that down with FEMA money. A couple buildings on 721 North Main. Then, of course, the Allen Creek Berm project, which a lot of people are familiar with, right? We put a bunch of infrastructure in and we're dropping the flood elevation in that area. And then the community rating system. And what is the community rating system? So that is a voluntary incentive-based program that rewards communities for going above and beyond the minimum standards of the National Flood Insurance Program. And in return, the community receives lower flood insurance rates. So nationally, there are only about 1,500 communities in the community rating system, which is less than 1% of the communities in the country, but it represents 7% of the communities in the National Flood Insurance Program. But 72% of all the policies in the NFIP are covered under CRS. So basically, it's the communities with more buildings in the floodplain or the need for more policies who are part of this community rating system. It's a point system, and where it says rate class, that's on one side, and on the other side are the points. As you gain points, you move up to different class, and in the center it lists the discount on insurance that would be received. We are currently a class 6, receiving a 20% discount for policies within the floodplain and a 10% discount for policies that are outside of the SFHA. SHA is the special flood hazard area. Within Michigan, there are 24 communities which is only 2% of the state that's involved in CRS. We're at a class 6 with Vassar, and there's only one other community in the state with a better rating than we are, and that's the city of Midland. And so I'd like to point out it's very difficult to get beyond a class 5. And there are very few communities in the entire nation that are above that. And the majority of those that make it past 5 are usually like coastal communities and communities that just have a lot of structures in the floodplain and a higher need for more floodplain management. This is the 13 areas that the city is getting points for to get to that class 6. There are more areas than this. There's about 19 different areas. But the rest of this presentation, I'm going to focus on the one that says 430 higher regulatory standards. That's basically what the ordinance that we're proposing will do. And you can see in that category right now, we're only getting 14% of the possible points. So there's a lot of points in that area. And I do think that if the ordinance is passed as proposed, we will make it to a class 5. Okay, so flood management zoning overlay district is a flood damage prevention ordinance that establishes higher building standards in the floodplain with the intent of minimizing public and private losses due to flood conditions. The idea of this came about from our 2007 flood mitigation plan. And that's a plan that you have to access FEMA grants, like the ones I mentioned from the mitigation projects. You have to update your plan every 5 years or else you're no longer eligible. So we updated it in 2012 and 17 and carried forward this idea of doing the overlay district. So why would we want to have overlay district? Well, we know that within the floodplain, there's a slightly more vulnerable community from both a social and economic standpoint. Changing weather patterns are causing higher risks. In other words, more frequent storms, larger storms. Rising economic flood damage. It's been documented here in Michigan that particularly in the last 30 years, the amount of damage in floodplain has gone way up. More structures in the floodplain in the future. We know that from modeling that we've done, that the FEMA maps are a bit of an underestimate, particularly in some areas. It's fairly accurate in others, but there's a few areas in town we know there's more structures that should be in the floodplain. Rising flood insurance rates. This is something that's very much in flux, but they're going up rapidly on the residential side, at least 18% per year. We have a chance to improve our rating within the community rating system, and also within the state here, the state, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy has floodway restrictions that are not imposed equally within the city here. So to further expand on that, so the state, if they have jurisdiction, requires permits for any fill or structure that would go in the floodplain, and they prohibit by state law residential construction within the floodway. However, Eagle only has jurisdiction where the contributing drainage area is greater than 2 square miles. And for us within the city here, that is about 50% of the floodplains, both if you count by parcel and buildings. So that on this map here, the areas that are circled in red are the areas where the state does not have jurisdiction, and so you can build residential in the floodway. And I particularly like to point out Allen Creek. All the fingers of Allen Creek that go off to the west, that's through the old west side, and that's where the majority of our structures within the floodplain are at. And the state doesn't have jurisdiction there. To give you a sense of how many structures are in the floodplain, there's 490 currently in the floodplain within the city. I've got a breakdown here by creek shed and reach. And so you can see from here, again, Allen Creek is where most of the structures are concentrated. And the floodplains basically represent about 10% of the city. All right, so higher regulatory standards. I mentioned that as part of the CRS. So the idea of higher regulatory standards is that these standards already exist, but we want to move them higher. It's kind of like a ladder. If you think of this ladder as floodplain regulations, the bottom of the ladder would be no regulations. The top of the ladder would be a complete prohibition of all development within the floodplain. We're probably halfway up the ladder, and with this proposal, we're proposing to move like up another rung. So again, most of these standards are already in place. We would like to change the thresholds. And most of these ideas came from a document called No Adverse Impact. It's put out by the Association of State Floodplain Managers. And then most of those same recommendations are repeated in the community rating system where you get points for doing these activities. So statewide, there is a building permit, a building code. And there's a law that says communities cannot have their own building code. We have to follow the state code, and communities may not regulate lower than those standards either. And because of that, that's why we're proposing this as a zoning overlay district, not as a building code. Within the building code, there is a concept called substantial improvement. And that basic idea is that if you have an existing structure in the floodplain and you propose a project that exceeds 50% of the market value of that structure, then the floodplain requirements apply, and you would treat it like you're building a new building. If that for your project falls below that 50% threshold, you don't have to bring it up to the standards. And also that within the building code, historic structures are exempt from this substantial improvement calculation. So you can continue to maintain a historic structure in perpetuity as long as you're not expanding it and making the footprint larger. And so I've mentioned that you can't change the building code. So this area is where I've actually gotten the most questions about the ordinance. And this is an area we can't change as far as like the definitions. But there is one area that we feel that we can, and I'll explain that. And the substantial improvement is sort of a complex issue. FEMA has a 174-page manual that helps communities and designers sort through what is counted and what is not. So again, we're not proposing to change that because we can't, because it's in the building code. However, we are allowed to change how you calculate the substantial improvement over time. In other words, cumulatively. And within the ordinance, we're proposing to count substantial improvement over a 10-year period. And the purpose of this is to avoid people splitting a project into multiple permits, like per year, and edging their way into a larger project. So it's currently undefined, but as a staff, we already do this. We already count cumulatively. In fact, we can count as long as we want. We can count for the life of the structure because it's currently not defined. However, we don't get any points within the community rating system unless you define it in a code. And so within the community rating system, to get any points for this particular item, you have to at least count over a 5-year period. But they're recommending you go to a 10-year period by offering the maximum amount of points if you go to at least 10 years. So that's what we're proposing. There have been some suggestions that we should go to like 3 years. If we did that, we would get no points in the community rating system, and it would be kind of somewhat pointless to do that, in my opinion. That substantial improvement also, I mentioned the word market, or the words market value, as part of the substantial improvement calculation. That's not defined in the building code either, so it leaves communities with not really knowing what to do. We'd like to define that as the true cash value as determined by the city assessor. The reasons for this would be to utilize the expertise of the assessor. It's a very different skill set than we have in systems planning or the building department. Then this would be more transparent because people would know what to expect. You can always go to the city assessor and appeal it if you don't agree. And this is actually exactly what we've been doing administratively for the last 30 years. I know because I've been the city's floodplain manager for the last 30 years. So this is not a new concept. This is codifying our practice. All right, so I'm going to go through some of the basics of what is already required in the floodway. So in the floodway, residential structures are prohibited where the state has jurisdiction. They're not prohibited where they don't. And then non-residential structures can be elevated or floodproof to 1 foot above the flood elevation, or the 1% annual chance flood elevation. And then any project in the floodway would have to provide a hydrologic study showing you're not causing a rise in the flood elevation. We would like to propose within the floodway that we move to not allowing any new structures with an exception for redevelopment that I'll explain next. Prohibit additions, no new residential uses to be consistent with the state throughout the floodway. No critical facilities, no structures without foundations. That would be like a shed. No accessory structures like a garage, and no parking where the depth's greater than 2 feet. That's because cars move and become destructive. So I mentioned redevelopment. This is sort of a hard part about writing an ordinance. It would be way easier just to say you can't build in the floodplain, but there are already structures in the floodplain. And over time, you'd want to see those structures removed or improved to be safer. So to encourage buildings to be improved, to be safer, we'd like to allow redevelopment with some caveats that there be no residential use in the redevelopment, that not be a critical facility, can't be a larger footprint than it already is. If someone chose to tear a building all the way down and build a new one, they'd have to arrange it on the lot to have the least impact on the floodplain. Of course, do a hydrologic study to show they're not causing any rise. And then we'd like to have them elevate that building 1 foot above the 0.2% chance elevation and not allow floodproofing. So I said the 0.2% chance. The current requirement is to elevate 1 foot above the 1%. So why would we want to do this? Well, this acknowledges climate change. As we know from the last 30 years that within the next 50 years, what we currently call the 0.2% elevation, flood elevation, we will be calling that the 100-year because it's because of storms getting larger, the size of the floodplain will get larger. So this is looking to the future, acknowledging climate change. This is already required in the building code for critical facilities, so why not apply it to other structures? This is becoming really common in coastal communities or more progressive communities like Austin and Fort Collins, Colorado. And it only adds about 1 foot of elevation. This is a cross section of one of the cross sections of Allen Creek. It's a little hard to read here, but the two top horizontal lines are showing that throughout this section, the 0.2% and the 1% are 1 foot apart. And that's fairly typical throughout Ann Arbor. So cost, what does it cost to elevate a building? Well, I was actually asked, why weren't we doing this big cost analysis to find out, we're implying all these regulations. Well, first of all, it's already required that you elevate structures. So we don't need to do a cost analysis for something that's already been required for over 30 years in the building code. But what we are changing is requiring people to go higher. So this little chart get on one side explains some of the cost and different styles of construction, and then they use one example, sort of an average cost. And in this particular example, they go 2 feet higher. We're only proposing right now in code, you go 1 foot higher than the requirement. But even so, using 2 feet, the cost of this particular typical residential house, it was a cost of $2,300 a foot higher, and then so $4,600. But when you compare that to the savings in flood insurance for going higher, it's only a 3.3 year payback. So over the course of a mortgage, if you would save in this case $37,000. So we feel that requiring these higher standards, while there is some upfront cost, in the long run, it's actually a savings. Okay, to come a little more direct comparison, within the floodway, where the state has jurisdiction, currently residential is prohibited. That would remain the same. Non-residential needs to be elevated above the 1 foot above the 1%. We're going to propose that no new structures be allowed, except with the exception of redevelopment, elevated 1 foot above the 0.2%. That critical facilities are already required to be elevated 1 foot above the 0.2%. We'd like to prohibit those. Critical facility would be like a fire station or a police station or a place that, I forget the exact number, that you can assemble over 5,000 people, or it's all defined in the building code. There's a few other things we'd like to prohibit too, house trailers. we don't have house trailers built anyways, but unless our code says that, we get no points in the community rating system. So some of this is somewhat administrative to get points. No structures without foundations, no accessory structures, and no parking where the depth's greater than 2 feet. So to compare that, where the state does not have jurisdiction, so where the city is responsible for the floodplain management, this chart is exactly like the chart on the page before, except for the top one part where it says currently in these areas, residential can be built if you elevate 1 foot above the floodplain and do a hydrologic study. We'd like to prohibit residential construction in those areas. So that one thing is probably the largest change. And the rest of this chart is the same as where the state has jurisdiction. So let's move on to the flood fringe. So within the flood fringe, residential structures have to be elevated 1 foot above the BFE, or the base flood elevation, and non-residential structures can be elevated or flood-proof to 1 foot above the BFE. That's current code. We would like to propose that we prohibit critical facilities, not allow structures without foundations, limit hazardous storage of hazardous materials, and then change the elevation requirement to 1 foot above the 0.2% annual chance. Again, that's where I mentioned that's about 1 foot higher than current code. So within the flood fringe, here's our little comparison here. So we have residential going from, instead of 1 foot above the 1% to 1 foot above the 2%. Non-residential, same thing, going from 1 foot above 1% to 1 foot above 0.2. And then prohibiting critical facilities, house trailers, and structures without foundations. What are some of the benefits of this proposed ordinance? Well, it would improve safety and welfare, reduce loss of life and property, save money and resources necessary for emergency responses, particularly on the city side during floods. A clearer permit process. We'd apply the state regulations more consistently across the floodplains, and potentially lower insurance rates by improving our rating within the community rating system. And with that, I can take questions. I thought I would leave it on this screen that explains the kind of the basic differences between what's current and what's proposed.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. I cannot see everybody on my screen, while there is a screen sharing. So I'd like to leave that up. So if you want to ask a question, you'll just have to speak up, and I'll see if I can moderate a little bit, but just ask any questions.
Jerry, what's the status of this, and what's the next steps? Did you present to Planning Commission, and how close are you to taking this to council, or what comes next?
So last month this was at Planning Commission, but during the meeting there was technical difficulties with the phone call-in numbers, and so they weren't able to act on anything at that particular meeting. And so there was a little bit of discussion about the ordinance, and based on some input from one particular homeowner group, they asked that I do a second public meeting on the ordinance, a specific meeting, a webinar. So we've already done one. So we have a webinar that is now scheduled for October 8th, so 2 weeks from tonight. And I'll be giving a presentation similar to this. We'll also be doing a flood map demonstration to show people how you can look up your property on the city's website, and then taking questions. Then we'll be back at Planning Commission on October 20th. And depending on the results there, we would either move on to City Council or, break to modify the ordinance at the direction of the Planning Commission.
I have a question. Jerry, I just want to make sure this is super clear that when you're saying no residential, that means no new residential, correct? Like if you have an existing house in the floodplain, you can keep it, correct? So just so that that's super clear for people.
Yes,
And
that is absolutely right.
And if you wanted to add on, could you go up as long as you're not getting past the 30-foot height minimum? Or is it only the footprint that you can't expand?
As far as going, like an existing structure in either the floodway or flood fringe, you could go up, but there is that substantial improvement threshold I mentioned. So if the cost of the project exceeded 50% of the market value of the structure, then you would have to elevate. And so that's a really good example. If you're in the floodway, and we change code to prohibit residential. This is actually the case right now in half of our floodplains. So, if you're in an area right now where the state has jurisdiction and you exceed 50% of the market value, your permit will be denied. Because you can't elevate the structure. You're not supposed to build the structure in the first place because what I said was, you're looking at it like it's new. So there is a limit to you can add on going up. You just can't exceed 50% of the market value of the structure.
Okay, thanks.
I had a question, Jerry. What's the definition of residential? Is it single family or multifamily?
Single and two. Well, in the state code, residential is actually defined as any human habitation. It doesn't even use the word residential. So the state prohibits like hotels and whatever in the floodway.
Okay. All right. And I had another question. You mentioned that there's a 2-foot allowance for parking structures.
We would like to prohibit new parking, not existing, new, like, site planning and new development and putting new parking in the floodway. We'd like to prohibit that where the depth of the floodplain is greater than 2 feet. That's because it can move cars.
Right. So my question is, I know that that's relatively safe for internal combustion engines, but what about EVs? But the batteries are usually slung pretty low.
So the concern is more of the cars not damaging the cars. The concern is more of the cars damaging other things by moving.
Okay. Fair enough.
Jerry, John Persky. I have a quick question. As you probably saw on the agenda, we're going to have a update from the Huron River Watershed Council talking about watershed health. Is there anything in this that has a direct or indirect health or impact, I should say, on watershed quality or health?
We are proposing to limit the storage of hazardous materials and to prohibit it. And I can give you a real life example. Right now, DTE is planning to put an elevated gas tank in the floodplain. It's at least not in the floodway, it's in the flood fringe. That will be difficult for us to say no to with the current regulations. With the proposed regulations, that would be prohibited.
And is there a quantity threshold that's defined for
No.
hazardous material? I mean, if for residential use or for business use or whatever, how do we define storage of hazardous materials?
There'll be a list of items basically that FEMA recommends, which is gasoline, and there's about 6 or 7 other common hazardous materials that they recommend we not allow. I don't have the list right in front of me.
Does the city have, I assume the city has addresses associated with all of this, and so would there be like a direct communication, a mailer to impacted facilities, or not facilities, buildings, residential or non? How is this going to be communicated?
So in other presentations where I had a little bit longer to go, I explained a little more on how codes work related to development. And so this ordinance that we're proposing is in the Unified Development Code, which applies to site planning, but it also applies when you're doing building permits. So the code wouldn't say you can't store these things at all ever. It's that you can't plan them. So it's not like we're going to be running out and looking for where people are storing these things currently. It's related to building permits and site plans. So that's where we'll be looking for it. So if somebody comes in and proposes a gas storage facility, we would say, no, you can't do that.
So thank you very much. And by the way, I've seen this before and do a good job in this. And I think, speak for all of us, we really appreciate your work on this.
Thank you.
So Jerry, John Kellerwood, I got a couple of questions. So what's primarily driving this? Is it the city's effort to kind of improve locally?
Yes.
And related to that, I've been out of touch with this for a couple of years, but my understanding is that FEMA maps were being updated. Did that happen? Is that reflected here, or is that still coming?
So our FEMA maps are not in the process of being updated. The current maps that we use, that we're obligated to use to be part of the National Flood Insurance Program, are from 2012. And I was part of that process, and the mapping effort took like 7 years. So even though our maps say 2012, they're really from like 2007 or 6 when they started that effort. So there's no process on the horizon. They haven't identified a time frame for updating our maps. There's some other products out there unrelated to the FEMA maps. There's a new product that just came out about a month and a half ago that was put out by the First Street Foundation that shows quite a bit more floodplains nationally, like 33% more, somewhere in there nationally, and it covers the whole country. And when you look at that compared to ours, it probably shows about 30% more for us too. And then we have locally, we now have calibrated stormwater models for all of our creek sheds, everything except for the Huron River. And we ran our model against the FEMA maps, and which is why I mentioned earlier, we know from our effort that there should be more structures within the floodplain. We haven't identified any like time frame to go to FEMA and change the map based on that. In fact, one idea in the future, not as part of this effort, but would be to use our study to map what would be called local floodplains and have a set of regulations for those. That is a common thing that's happening throughout the country. It's just emerged in the last few years in the world of floodplain management. So that may be a next step after this step is done.
And just one more question, and I'm not quite certain how to ask this, but if implemented, do you have a sense of the total area that would be added to the floodplain by this within the city?
Zero.
What's the measure of kind of impact, or what's the addition?
So the floodplain area will remain exactly the same. The ordinance itself defines the district geographic area as the floodplain plus 50 feet. And the reason for that is because floodplain regulation related to development is not based on the boundaries that are on the map. It's based on the flood elevation compared to the real elevation of the land. So those lines on the map don't mean a whole lot. So the district that this will apply to is a little bit larger. that little bit larger area matches what we identify currently and have for about the last 20 years in our permit tracking system. That's how, so we're basically codifying our staff procedure.
Got it.
And most of the properties that come in, you know, I take a look at it and it's like, all right, the corner of the property touches the floodplain, where the building's at, it's out. So these regulations don't apply and I sign off on the permit. That's typically what would happen. Unless the actual structure is in the floodplain, none of these regulations would apply.
Thank you.
Jerry, I have a question as to how much open space is available that would support the no new development. Is there a way to describe that?
You mean like undeveloped properties?
Yeah. So if we were going to have no new development if the rule was no new development in the flood.
I'm gonna skip ahead here. I have some examples and some maps that I can show you that will illustrate that. I've created a map like this for each one of the floodplain reaches and identified, you know, how many parcels are in the floodplain, floodway, how many are each of the zoning categories we've got listed. But one of the categories here is vacant parcels within the floodway. And the reason we just did the floodway because that's the only place we're prohibiting new structures. So I'll just run through a couple of these to give you a sense of it. So within the main branch of Allen Creek here, there are 8 vacant parcels, 0 within the Eberwhite, 1 within the Murray Washington, 0 within the West Park Miller, 2 with the southern branch of the West Park Miller, 8 within the Mallett's Creek, 1 within Swift Run, 2 within the Huron River, 6 Traver, none in Miller. So there you can see there's not a lot of parcels that this would affect. So that number added up was probably like 20, 25.
And is there a way to measure the success of implementing this? You know, like does it have a goal, like no houses destroyed, or you know, some way that we know that using this will be effective, successful, what we want it to be?
I mean, I have a few measurements that I'm required to submit every year within the community rating system, and that would be buildings removed or buildings substantially improved. In other words, elevated, you know, to where they have to meet the code. Those are probably the 2 main things.
Okay. And you said there's something like 400 or so buildings that I'll use the term at risk. Is that correct?
490.
And would a goal be to improve all of those?
Over time, yes, but we'll never get there probably because there's a lot of historic structures, which I had that on those charts too. We could go through that if you wanted to, but because historic structures are exempt within the building code of that substantial improvement threshold, those buildings could be maintained as is in perpetuity if someone wanted to. And you know, that giving them that designation kind of encourages people to maintain them.
Right.
So
Thank you.
those probably won't change. Although there's a case, I have an example I could show you. This is a house on Murray that the owner voluntarily elevated it to affect his flood insurance. This house is in the floodway in the historic district. No requirement to elevate it, but he elevated it about 2 feet so that his first floor is 1 foot above the current flood elevation. He actually went 6 inches higher than that. But it was all for the purpose of lowering his flood insurance. This is the stats on it. He went high enough, he almost got to where our proposed code is. He would have had to gone a third of a foot higher, but I think he said that his insurance was around $3,000 a year, and it dropped to around $300 by elevating. So we might see historic structures being elevated as flood insurance rates change, and it becomes more of an incentive to elevate the houses.
Right. Thanks.
So, are there any other questions for Jerry? Okay, I don't hear any. So I just had one, Jerry. So what if, because of, the climate emergency and flooding becomes much more prevalent than was predicted, how will this make it easier for the city to respond, to more rapidly respond to new requirements for building in terms of redefining the floodway and the flood fringe?
Well, the result will be there will be fewer structures built, and those that are built will be built higher. So they will be more resistant to larger storms in the future.
Okay, but the immediate risk to the resident is just an increase in their flood insurance. Is that correct?
Yeah. So those rates are going up. We already get a 20% discount as a result of this. I anticipate us being able to move to a class 5, and there'll be another 5% reduction in flood insurance rates as a result.
Okay.
I have another question, and that is based on the public feedback that you've gotten so far. How would you just kind of characterize where people are with this? Because I think that, those of us that are out of the floodplain are probably like, this seems like a great idea in terms of climate change. And then there's, close to 500 structures that are in it, and those people are in a very different situation. And so I'm just wondering, kind of, what have you been hearing from the public in terms of your public interactions around this?
So the majority of comments are, why aren't you going further? And prohibiting more development. That's been the bulk of the comments. But then there's one particular homeowners group who are very concerned, and that's the reason why I went over in detail the substantial improvement section of the ordinance that is in the building code. That their concerns are in an area that we don't have the authority to change. And they're just basically concerned that, and this is a historic building, they're concerned that they wouldn't be able to improve their building over time, which is not the case. The historic structures are exempt, and so they will be able to maintain and improve that over time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I have maybe one more question. Jerry, I've looked a little bit at the First Street kind of projections and their effect. How do you feel about that compared to what's proposed? Because those look pretty different in terms of the amount of water.
Yeah. So these regulations would only apply to the FEMA maps and the First Street Foundation, which is called flood factor.
Yeah.
They show about 30% more floodplains, but they map something a little bit different. So they map what's called urban flooding, which is basically flooding that comes out of a storm pipe that leads to a creek and not the creek. So FEMA kind of, their formula is that they're mapping the floodplain associated with a creek, even if the creek is in a pipe. in other words, like, so Allen Creek, they're mapping the main line, not the feeder lines. And so the First Street stuff took into account all flooding. And so it actually is a kind of a better representation of where you're going to see water. But a lot of the areas that they show flooding tend to be where the FEMA maps don't, tend to be streets, not necessarily lots where people's houses are going to be affected or it's going to affect the building that much. But it is an interesting snapshot of, I suspect that the next time that we go through a map revision, we'll provide our calibrated stormwater model to FEMA, and they'll be looking at the stuff on the First Street, and they'll probably end up somewhere in between the two.
Okay, thanks.
Any more questions for Jerry?
Christopher Graham.
Oh, Chris.
Hi, Stephen. Jerry, your work here is extraordinarily fine, and your presentation is outstanding. It's been what, more than a decade?
Yep.
Maybe 15 years in the making here.
Yep, since 2007.
And so I think you have very carefully crafted it. To what degree have you been able to build in anticipation of even more rain, more heavy rain events?
Yeah, that's the main reason for proposing to require elevation and flood proofing to the 0.2% or the 500 year instead of the 1% or the 100 year. Even though it's only 1 foot higher, I mean, our maps already show the 500 years. So, some communities simply just say, let's require you to go 1 foot higher or 2 feet higher, kind of arbitrarily. But I felt like looking at our maps, we already have it mapped out of what the 500-year floodplain is. And I say it's about 1 foot everywhere. There are very small couple of areas that it's greater than 1 foot, and so we've already got that mapped out. And we know, and I mentioned earlier, we know that within it 50 years or less, based on the last 30 years, what we currently call the 500 year, that's going to be our 100-year elevation. So climate change is the driving force behind that particular part of the code.
Good. I have been working with a very wonderful client down on Pleasant Lake Road since 1980. And there's an agricultural drain through their backwoods, draining about 700 acres of farmland. When I first went there, it was probably 15 feet wide with some fairly sharp banks. And I was asked to clear the wood and trees and down brush and everything out of it for about a mile. I was there today, and that agricultural drain is probably 3 times wider and half again as deep, and beginning to wash out bridges that farmers of the land built before my client got there. The amount of water that's beginning to flow across the land as a result of the storms we've had this summer alone. We have had 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 1 3/4 inch, 2 inch, up to 3 3/4 inches of rain in short time periods, and then no rain this summer. The regime that we are looking at about how water flows on the land and how much stormwater that we have to deal with is rapidly changing. And so I'm very happy that you are planning ahead.
Yeah, along those lines, I know from being directly involved in the Allen Creek Berm project and that being smack dab in the middle of the floodplain at the bottom of Allen Creek, we've had two-year events this year already.
Yeah. Is your tunnel open?
It's functional. The stormwater portion is functional. The pedestrian aspect of it is looking more like close to the end of October now.
So will we not have any more floods on Depot Street?
So the effect of what we put in will reduce flooding in small events up to about the 5-year, should pretty much eliminate flooding up to about the 5-year, but then between the 5-year and up, there will be flooding, but the depth of it, which in that area along the railroad tracks, the flood maps currently show about a 10-foot depth, and we are dropping that to 3.5 foot.
Very good. Wonderful.
Yeah, that's good. So,
Can I ask a quick question about affordable housing and if these new regulations would affect any of the city's properties that they own in affordable housing?
Potentially. There are a couple city parcels that are in the floodplain, like 721 North Main, 415 West Washington. But both of those sites that I just mentioned are in the areas where the state has jurisdiction, so residential is already prohibited. So the only effect of the ordinance really would be requiring structures to be elevated 1 foot higher in the flood fringe.
And that would only be if they came up for some sort of development or remodeling, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's a different philosophical question. Should you be building affordable housing in the floodplain? If you ask me, I would say no, that just like HUD prohibits it. There's a reason that they prohibit it. I don't think the city should be involved in encouraging housing in the floodplain, but that's just my opinion.
Okay, any more questions for Jerry? Okay, it sounds like, thank you, Jerry. That's very impressive. The work you've done trying to thread the needle, between what's necessary and what's possible.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry. So
I'll stop sharing my screen for you.
Okay, so let's move on to, why don't we go to the Huron River Watershed Council presentation next? So,
Yep, hi,
no
I
problem.
am here. Let me share my screen. Oh, I think you'll have to give me permissions as well.
Galen?
I'm gonna switch him over right quick. Co-host.
Yep, there it is. All right. People see that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So thanks for having us. Both myself, my name is Paul Steen, and Rick Lawson, who will be my co-presenter, work with the Huron River Watershed Council. We're happy to have this chance to talk to the Environmental Commission and share some of the things that we've been working on. just a little outline of what we're going to talk about. Why are we here? So this is kind of an interesting question. It's my outline, but I'm also going to address my first point here. So I think it was 2017. It might have been 2018. I can't remember. I came to one of your meetings and presented this stream ecosystem model. Back then, it was like this brand new thing that we had just kind of put together. And presented it. You guys, those who were on the commission then gave me feedback saying, hey, why don't you think about these aspects? So over the last couple of years, we've been tweaking it, adding components, hopefully making it more robust and more reflective of stream ecosystems. And so we're back. We're gonna show you what we've done, give a comparison between the ecosystem health in Ann Arbor from 2010 versus 2020. So that's my aspect. And then we have also been in the process the last 2 years of writing a new watershed management plan for the Huron River and its tributaries as it flows through Ann Arbor. So this is a watershed management plan which is on the verge of being approved by Eagle. And Rick will go through our recommendations that we have in that plan. So on my part, I'm going to start with this creek shed model. So just to take a step back for a moment, here's the Huron River watershed. We have the dark blue line, that's the Huron River as it flows through Oakland and Livingston and Washtenaw and down to Wayne County and out Lake Erie. And of course, here we are right in Ann Arbor. So this model that we developed, we're actually applying on the geographic scope of a creek shed. So we'll apply it to Mill Creek and we'll apply it to Portage Creek over here. So this is this is watershed wide, though for this presentation, we're honing in on Ann Arbor. So what are the components that make up a stream ecosystem? These 5 categories here are processes and components of an ecosystem that set the expectations and set what is found there. So we have hydrology, important component naturally of an ecosystem. We have hydraulic processes. We have geomorphology, which is the transfer of wooden sediments to create the habitat. Physiochemical, temperature, nutrients, contaminants, all those chemical aspects that control various processing and functioning of systems. And then we have biology. So what's living there in that ecosystem? Now the Watershed Council has a lot of data, some of which is what we collected, some of which is what's publicly available or we work through in partnership to get. And that's everything listed on the right-hand side of these categories. So for example, when we talk about hydrology, what we have to understand the hydrology is land cover. When we're talking about hydraulics, how water is transported within the system itself, we make our own flow measurements and we have an understanding of what's going on with the dams and so on. So you can see in each of these categories, each of these 5 categories, there's these different parameters that HRWC has. Okay, and those are the parameters that go into this model and that we score and that give us our final result. So 13 different parameters going into this model. Okay, so what does this model look like? It's really simple. For the most part, it's pretty qualitative as compared to quantitative, kind of a kind of a mix, actually, to be honest. So we take our 13 parameters of ecological health that we just talked about. For each creek shed, so that's our geographic area, we're scoring those from 1 to 5. You can also think of it as giving a grade. Ultimately, what we're ending up with is a scorecard. So we're giving these grades from F to A based on its impact on the ecosystem. Within each of those 5 functional categories, we average those scores. So then for each creek shed, we have a score for hydrology, we have a score for biology, for physiochemical. Then you add those 5 categories together. And finally, you rescale those results because they're not quite going from 0 to 100 naturally. And we end up with a result that's 0 to 100. So the idea is it's very straightforward, easy to understand. Whether we're talking grade values of A to F, or we're talking 0 to 100, it's all what we're used to when we were scored ourselves in school. So that's the point, is that you can look at it and understand it pretty intuitively. So one question that comes up, we have these variety of parameters. How do you decide how to grade them? One of the reasons we changed it to this school level grading is that all these parameters are different on different scales or different units. Inherently, they have to be scored differently because they're different things. So it's taking these parameters, which can be very quantitative, and we're making them all somewhat qualitative so that they can all be put within the same model. Sometimes, like when we talk about measuring for E. coli or phosphorus, there are state established standards that help us decide whether it's A, B, C, D, F. For macroinvertebrates, we have reference points. So we have places where it's really good, that will be an A, places where it's barely existent, that would be an F, and then we're able to find the gradation between all of that to get to the score. Sometimes it comes down to professional judgment. What impact does this dam have on the river? We don't necessarily have numbers for that. So anyway, so that's how you grade all these parameters. We did that for each one. Then you go through that model process, and across the whole watershed, just to give like a big bird's eye view, this is what we end up with. So the best place that we have in the Huron River watershed is Portage Creek, as it runs through Hell near Pinckney. So the best place we have gets an 83 on this score. And then we see as it goes down, we have Mill Creek, considered healthy but certainly impacted, has a lot of agricultural impacts, so scores a 70. South Oar Creek in Brighton gets a 50, highly suburban area. And then as we get into more of an urban environment in Ann Arbor, we see the scores drop off even further. Traver Creek, that's our best tributary in terms of quality in Ann Arbor, gets a 40. So we'll take a closer look, zoom into Ann Arbor here. Here are our Ann Arbor creek shed scores. So Allowance, which is, Jerry talked a lot about Allowance tonight already. Allowance is basically an underground pipe for the vast majority of it. For the most part, that is considered, in terms of, if you compare that to a naturally flowing ecosystem, it is considered a very disturbed ecosystem, but we wouldn't necessarily expect anything different. All these other creeks are mostly above ground. Mallets has parts that isn't, but you can see how the Swift Run section of Ann Arbor here is, besides Allen, is considered the most degraded. Then we have millers, mallets. And then what I guess, technically Fleming and Honey do have like little sections that are part of Ann Arbor, but for the most part, those are watersheds that are just on the fringe of the Ann Arbor city. And then Traver and the actual Huron River drainage score 37 and a 39. So somewhere between heavily disturbed and moderately disturbed in terms of the ecosystem. In terms of a scorecard, that's one way you can look at it. You can also look at individual parameters. You can also, by just taking a weighted average, depending on how much land area each of those creek sheds holds, you can get a weighted average. So for 2010, our final score for Ann Arbor is 28.1. So slightly above to what we are calling heavily disturbed. Now, 2020, we do see some shifting, but it's nothing too dramatic. So here's our 2020 scores. The colors are basically the same. Everything in relationship to itself is kind of the same, but we do see a few of these creek sheds are showing slight improvements. And in this case, I'll show you what improvements those are in a minute. The weighted average did go up from 28.1 to 28.8, so a very, very small yet noticeable improvement in that score. Some things just don't change, I think, is the reality. Land use changes extremely slowly. The hydraulics change very slowly, and those are really some of the major controlling factors of an ecosystem. So when we're talking about expecting to see changes, I think we look at it on a decadal scale. It's not a short-term process here. Okay, so just some changes that we have seen. Some of these are kind of interesting, I believe. Traver went up 3 points from a 37 to a 40. What we have seen in Traver is a decrease. The score for water flow has gone down from a B down to a D. Essentially, that means it's actually exactly what we'd expect after listening to Jerry's presentation. We are getting, without a doubt, from 2010 to 2020, we're getting these more intense rainstorms. It's very noticeable in our data, and that's why that drops that far in Traver Creek. But otherwise, Traver Creek is showing some improvements. The macroinvertebrates, the insects, are doing better. Phosphorus is very slowly going down. E. coli levels are going down. Conductivities is going up. So all of those would be considered good things. I should say conductivity is going down, but makes the score go up. In Miller's Creek, we are again seeing a decrease in phosphorus. We're seeing the bugs doing better. And then Swift Run says the flow is actually went up by 1 step, and I don't know the story behind that. It's not as logical. It could just have to do with sampling variation. A lot of this has to do with sampling variation, which is why we just need to keep on monitoring at that long scale. So that's kind of the update then for 2020. I don't have to belabor the point. I think overall we're in a better place than we were 10 years ago, but we're talking slow improvement, incremental improvement. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Rick.
Okay, thanks, Paul. For those of you, I've met many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rick Lawson. I'm a watershed planner with the council, and I've been working at the council for just about 15 years, developing watershed management plans and then implementing projects from them, and have worked with worked with a lot with Jerry on projects and in the city and some other city staff as well as others. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how that scorecard plays into our watershed management plan overall, how we break that down. And ultimately, I'm going to just kind of go, really surface on that, but then get into some of the recommendations that we're making that are coming out of that watershed management plan for each of the creek sheds to continue to improve them. And also a little bit on how we look at that as far as like, what do we prioritize? What are the most important things that we should be investing our money in, our tax dollars? We had, prior to this most recent update, we had a pretty large plan. So it covered the entire middle Huron section of the watershed, which is basically all the watershed in Washtenaw County, all the way up to just below Portage Lake, then all the way down to Belleville Lake. And so that entire stretch was a very big watershed. It was written, the plan was written in 2008 and then updated slightly in 2011. The recommendations were pretty general because when you write a plan to that scale, that's what you end up needing to do, is to make some pretty broad recommendations across the board. We've now, when we're doing our updates, we're splitting that watershed into 3 smaller sections. And we focused on the middle section first because we had the most data. The city, at the time we started this, the city had just finished and released their very sophisticated stormwater model. So we wanted to utilize that in analyzing the hydrology, for example. So we had a lot of good information to really dig into it in that section. Looks like we lost. Paul's back. Can you reshare your screen, Paul?
Oh man, sorry, I totally forgot about okay, so you guys will appreciate this. My cat stepped on my keyboard and put me in airplane mode, which of course turns off your Wi-Fi.
Glad you were able to get back quickly.
Yeah, luckily I was watching the screen, so I realized what happened, because if I wasn't at that moment, I would have had no idea. Okay, do you see it all right?
Yeah, being just, there you go.
We saw you get rather furry there for a while, Paul.
All right. So back to what I was saying, we split this up into different sections. So now we've focused on the middle section, which basically cuts the watershed from above Barton Pond, so that we could include that, down to the Geddes Dam, and wrote the plan up for that. We've submitted that to Eagle, and they're in the last stages of review. We have some minor edits left to do before it gets approved. And then concurrently, we're now working to develop the upper section, which goes from Barton all the way back up to Portage. And that's one that we're working to develop now. Can you go to the next slide? Paul's got control, so he gets to drive here. So this just sort of reiterates what I was saying geographically very, very quickly. The very light on your screen section is the entire Middle Huron watershed. So that's what I was describing before. And the plan that we wrote up is for the orange section. And in fact, it did include Fleming Creek, so just below Geddes Dam. So I misstated that a little bit. So that we could cover something that wasn't entirely urbanized in the plan. Next slide, please. This section has a fair number of impairments that are state listed, and a number of impairments that have yet to be listed, or that we feel like are certainly below where we'd like them to be. You guys probably know about all of these, the pathogens through the main section of the river and all the tributaries. equalize the base on that. Swift Run, mostly that's altered hydrology, but it's reflected as poor fish and macroinvertebrate communities. It's written to control sediments. Mallett's Creek, the same thing, same impairment. And then the big one is the nutrient levels in phosphorus and Belleville lakes. That was just revised last year and ratcheted down more tightly. So next slide, please. So most of the plan is written to address those impairments. That's how the plan, these plans are driven by Eagle, who gave us the grant to do these plans. And all the rules are written essentially by EPA out of the Clean Water Act under Section 319 of that act. So it all starts with how do you identify the quality of your state waters, down to how are you going to fix the ones that you've identified have problems. So the whole thing is really driven by addressing the problems. We do write some sections to protect those features that are really those streams, those waterways that are doing really, really well. In fact, we wrote a plan for Portage Creek that is just that. It's really mostly recommendations for protection. That's not the case in the river through and in the tributaries through Ann Arbor. So here's our main recommendations that are in the plan. We go into a lot more detail in the plan, but I'm going to kind of go over the main headlines for you. So in the main thing that can really help address a lot of these issues, and I should back up and say, the focus is on the issues that we can control in that section of the watershed. So there are some impairments, such as mercury is listed throughout the watershed. That's really driven by air deposition. We can't do a lot about that locally, so we don't spend a lot of time making recommendations on that. That would also be true for PFAS. We know that most of those sources are upstream of this watershed, so we can't control them within the watershed, so we don't spend a lot of time making recommendations on that. So that's a limitation of geography that is important to keep in mind here. So the biggest sort of broadest recommendation that we have is basically more green stormwater infrastructure. Distributed infiltration throughout the watershed will help over time to control the hydrology and the hydraulics, get more of that water into the ground, treat and filter out nutrients. It can be a way to expose the water for killing off bacteria as well. It provides a lot of really great benefits for a pretty limited cost if done in a very distributed way. Continued public education. We have found that through our survey work, following the broad education that we do and that the city does, that we are moving the needle on that. We're getting better awareness, better recognition of the issues, things like recognition of storm drains and that they are directly connected to our waterways. They don't get treated at the wastewater treatment plant. Those things are starting to gain more knowledge. And I think that they're some of the biggest things that are having an impact on our environmental numbers, especially with bacteria, for example, because we don't really have any other major projects that are going on that have been addressing that, other than education on pet waste, for example, as well as, I guess, the city's work on detecting and eliminating illicit discharges, which would be the human sources on those. And along those lines, continuing to implement stormwater management plans and the updates to those really, you can't go unmentioned. The city has a really good implementation of their stormwater strategy, and they have a lot of different ways to address and improve our stormwater management throughout the city, and they're making investing tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure, in large-scale projects as well as small-scale projects, and that really should continue. There are a lot of pieces to that. We continue to coordinate with them on those. Pet waste education enforcement, as I said, that education is really the thing that we think is at least the best candidate for what is moving the direction on bacteria, as we're seeing numbers start to go down throughout the city. We're not where we need to be, but they're going down. An enforcement of the city's pet waste ordinance would be helpful as well, just to sort of keep people aware that that's there. I think the awareness is there. Compliance probably could be better. Targeted enforcement of the fertilizer law, statewide fertilizer law now since 2012, could be beneficial as well. I don't know that there has been much of any enforcement of that law statewide, really. And then we've been having a lot of discussion with the city about detention pond evaluation, maintenance, and retrofitting, and they're starting to engage in that. They've targeted a few sites where some improvements there could really pay off some larger benefits. There are a lot of detention ponds throughout the city that are very old and probably not kept up under their maintenance guidelines, and so improving the function of those, could provide some broad-based benefits across the whole area. So those are some general recommendations that really apply across the entire city. They're not geographically specific, but would help to improve numbers across the board. And then we make some specific, some site-specific or creek shed area-specific recommendations. Again, working with the city, they've instituted a green streets policy such that whenever they are doing a complete tear down of a street and rebuild, they look for green infrastructure design possibilities for increasing infiltration, creating a little bit of additional storage. And storage and infiltration are really the key in Allowance Creek, because so much of that is piped. All the pollutants that come off of the heavily residential and built up area go right into the storm drains and right out into the river. So really impacting the hydrology and everything down the line. And so storage and detention projects, we've already engaged in a number of those. West Park, under Pioneer High School, those type of projects, looking for more opportunities to do that on public properties as well as under redevelopment is a good strategy. And then there were also a number of recommendations under the city's flood control strategy that was developed after the stormwater model was built that can provide some water quality benefits as well. So those are the targets in Allowance Creek. We consider Allowance Creek to be a lower priority tributary, not because not because there isn't room to get better there, but because it's going to take a lot of investment to really make some significant change in Allowance Creek, because it is so built over at this point. To get that restored to a native like creek will take many, many years and many, many millions of dollars. So investing a lot of time and opportunity in Allowance Creek will not kind of get us to the improvement levels that we could get in, say, Traver Creek, which is kind of a creek that's on the cusp, that if we did put some investment of time and effort in, we could make some significant progress. So, I was trying to change the slide, but Paul, you have the control. So I have the next, thanks. So there you are with Traver Creek. We consider that a high priority because it's mostly, mostly above ground. It had, it still sees the daylight, is still able to go through a lot of area with riparian cover. So there's, good mix of land uses in the watershed. So we have opportunity, to continue to improve that. We found some areas for targeted stream restoration that could really pay off some good dividends. We engaged in a rapid assessment process throughout the entire watershed for this plan to identify stream areas that were indicative of showing prevalence of erosion. That's what you see the volunteers there doing in the photo, and that helped us to identify targets. And we did find a couple in Traver that would be really high payoff. So small projects that, small investment could pay off with some significant dividends. Protection of agricultural lands and agricultural best management practices. We still have some opportunities in the upper stretches of Traver Creek beyond the city of Ann Arbor's boundaries as well. The Watershed Council has a program going on called Whole Farms that has some incentive money available in conjunction with a lot of other programs out there to do just those things. So more investment in that could pay dividends as well. Miller's Creek we consider kind of more of a medium priority. Again, it's been heavily degraded, and so it will take a lot of investment, but there are some significant opportunities, and a lot of money has already been invested in Miller's Creek to make some improvements as well. City spent a lot of time and effort on developing the sediment accumulation study with some really good recommendations there. In fact, there's a project, the first project based on that study is underway now. I think it's mostly constructed at this point. And there's several other big ones there that could really help improve the hydrology and the flow and management of sediment in that creek, which is the biggest problem there. Again, some more targeted green streets improvements and storage and detention in places throughout Miller's Creek. And again, in the plan, we have some specific locations where we call that out. Mallets Creek, we still consider a high priority as there is a fair bit of space to work in and, some good riparian cover. There's been a lot of money invested in Mary Beth Doa Park and the stream restoration already in areas. We have a few other areas that could be good targets for restoration. And just heard recently from the Washtenaw County that they'll be bumping up one of those areas for a higher priority for the State Revolving Fund loan program to get that started a bit earlier than they originally thought based on our assessment. So that was that's really good to hear. It goes to the partnership that we have with the county and in the city as well. So that could really help with that strategy or with that restoration. And then Mallets Creek itself has a strategy that the players partners there have been working on for over a decade, and there are a number of the policies that are in place that are really leaders in the area have come out of that group as well. And so there's still a number of projects there to implement. Next slide. And I think this is the last of the tributaries. Swift Run is a high priority. You saw from Paul's slide that it is heavily impacted, but there are still significant opportunities to make some improvements in the creek. We've got a big area with a lot of good riparian cover and the downstream end of it there's really good target for stream restoration. Long stretches that have been impacted by the altered hydrology upstream that could be fixed with some stream restoration. That coupled with lots of installation of green stormwater infrastructure would be really helpful. The Watershed Council, working with the city and Ann Arbor Public Schools, finished a project just last year, or actually the year before, to install some significant green infrastructure as good demonstration projects at this point on county properties, school, and a couple of local private properties as well. We need more projects like that in conjunction with the stream restoration to really make an impact on Swift Run. And as always, more targeted green streets improvements and storage and detention. That sort of goes across the board as well, but those are more specific recommendations that we have in the plan. Fleming Creek is in probably the best shape, and it's a small part of Ann Arbor, but a big part of this plan. It's the most unique of the tributaries that we have in the watershed. Has probably the least amount of impairments. We do have a targeted stream section that is impacted by high levels of bacteria that is coming just downstream of Domino's Farms. So we're just actually wrapping up a separate bacteria study there that will give us some really good numbers that we can then take to them and talk to them about a little bit better herd management there, and some management techniques to keep some of the animals out of the stream to improve those numbers. They've been a good partner, and we expect them to continue to work on things and get it right. And then in the direct drainage, we have some really high slope areas that need to be managed a little bit better with some restoration projects, and some opportunities with some floodplain protection and management as well, and then a little bit better dam management, especially at Argo Dam, which has a pretty big impact on the hydrology and the erratic nature of the hydrology downstream of that could be improved. So that was a really quick rapid fire set of a very big effort to develop this watershed management plan for this area. Next slide, I think, is just a closing slide, but if you want to go to that, yep, that's it. So with that, leave the few minutes we have left for any questions or comments.
Anybody? John?
Yeah, Rick and Paul, thank you very much. Really excellent presentation. By the way, Paul, it was in June of 2018 that you presented last to the Environmental Council or Commission. And I went back and looked at your presentation, and maybe just one key point from that was, at least at that time, your weighted average for the area within the city of Ann Arbor was 30. I don't know, I'm frankly not all that interested in what a little bit changed, and maybe it was 29.7 or something, and you rounded up or whatever. But just some general comments and then some specific things of interest from my perspective. First of all, I have to say, you guys are a part of an outstanding organization. I mean, your presentation was really great. And if you look at your website, and I encourage people to do it, it's amazing the information that you guys provide and the data that you've collected, and the reports for every creek shed and for the watershed and all the grades and everything. It's amazing. It's an exemplar frankly for the city. And like I said, I would encourage people to take a look at it.
Thank you.
I have a couple of suggestions that may sound familiar because they're not a whole lot different than what I gave back then. And that is back in 2018, in the aftermath of that, and even today, I can find no evidence of the overall scores for creek sheds or for the watershed. So the kinds of charts that you showed today, like the one which was a large overview that showed all the numbers for each one of the creek sheds, I can't find anything like that on your website. And it seems to me that would really help a lot, where people can start at 30,000 feet and do deep dives, and they can drill deeper and deeper and deeper. And the other thing that I'd love to see is that you trend chart that, recognizing that, as you say, these are things where you move the needle very, very slowly. But nevertheless, I think we want to see a trend chart. And I think the other thing that I'd love to see, like we should have with any SMART goal, specific, measurable, attainable, applicable, realistic, and time bound, is that a goal is set. And and that might be, a goal for 2050. I don't know, it may not be something that's, very short term, given how difficult it is to move the needle. And for example, one of the things that I'd love to see is, is there a goal, and maybe it's not an overall goal for the city or for the watershed, but could there be a goal, for example, that could be linked to the ability to be able to say, in the city of Ann Arbor, the watershed quality is high enough that people can go swimming in the Huron River. And I've heard before that generally the water quality is pretty good, except for 48 hours after a storm. But that would be something that would be potentially tremendously motivating for people. You got tubers, you got the Cascades, you got more access with the DTE site. You've got ponds, Argo Pond, place like that. If maybe the city would set a goal and the residents would jump in and say, hey, if we could drop E. coli levels to X, or we could get the watershed levels or the watershed score or the creek shed score to some number, then this could be a reality that could be recognized. And I think it would be wonderful for the people of Ann Arbor to be able to swim in the river. So I'd really encourage you to look at how the information that you presented to us to present to the community, and to use that to actually drive actions and to drive interest. And realistically, I've looked at a couple of other watersheds, and maybe the goal is just to maintain where we are today, recognizing that, there's more and more development. And so there's a lot of factors that are really difficult to control. And then maybe that's the most realistic goal, that at least it doesn't degrade. Just a couple of other hints. I've looked at the Chesapeake Bay, and they used to have a metric system. It doesn't look like it's being maintained anymore. The city of Portland actually has a really, really good system, but they don't have scores. They have grades, but they don't take everything all together like you guys have done and generate an overall, 0 to 100 kind of index, which I think is really important. And just a couple of other things. In the aftermath of the meeting 2 years ago, Shannon Gibrando, who's on the phone call, and I made a proposal for signage. You talked about how public education is helpful. We presented to Jen Lawton, and I can't remember who was involved. I think Laura Woodrubin was in 1 or 2 of the meetings, but there were other people from the council that were present, and to put some signage up to raise awareness, to show what are some of the scores, what are the indexes, and what can people do, and to place those near parking lots, place them near the Cascades, put them, in the Arbor, where there's, a lot of people that are at the water, in the Gallup Park, places like that. And I think it's a pity that something like that hasn't gone anywhere. You have the Sustaining Ann Arbor grant program, where Ann Arbor grants money for projects, and potentially, the Watershed Council could raise money for that, and potentially it could come from the city. And then lastly, I'd be interested in knowing, and Steve has sent some information out, whether microplastics are reflected at all, for example, in suspended solids. I personally have a lot of concern about microplastics entering into the environment and then into the food chain. And I'm wondering if that's at all reflected. So sorry for the many, many comments, and I don't expect you to answer all of them, but I'd also be happy to to sit down with you guys and talk about it, you know, in a Zoom meeting or something like that outside the context of this. So I don't want to dominate the conversation, but I'll just throw those ideas out there. But I would be interested in some comments on the microplastics in particular. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
And great job again. You guys are really great. I mean, it's wonderful what you guys have done, and I think, you know, there's opportunities for improvement, but everybody should recognize, and like I said, the city can only aspire to be as good as you guys are.
Thank you, John. I was taking notes so I can address some of what you mentioned. So one thing you said was you really liked our website, but you would really like to see these scores go up on the website. And they're there to some extent, but they're not as front and center as they perhaps could be. Did you find our mapping system? Yeah. So we got all these scores on the mapping system, but we don't necessarily have it organized in a very communications friendly manner. So that's something that I can for sure look at.
Okay. You have a report for everyone. You have the individual grades, but I didn't see something that shows, you know, like at the top, you know, Mallett's Creek, index so-and-so, and this is how we calculate it, or something like that. It's not something, if it's there, it's to me, it's very buried. I mean, you have a lot of other great things,
hidden.
Actions for improvement, you know, a lot of other things, but that's to me not very visible.
Yep. So that's something that I could go back to and highlight, especially as now that we came back and revisited this model, and I got Rick and a lot of the other staff on board with it. One thing we're going to strive to do is to keep it updated on 3-year intervals as we move forward. So we're going to be able to develop trend charts over time, as you mentioned. So that's something that we have in mind. Going back to that 2018 meeting, just there was interest in the participants of the commission at that point that to get contaminants into this model. So that is something that we were able to pull in for the new numbers, which can probably pull the scores down a little bit. I found the good GIS source. It was nicely organized already by a graduate student at the University of Michigan who did this big project with contaminants. And so now this model has in it, I'll just list these: the toxic release inventory, Superfund sites, landfills, hazardous waste, brownfields, leaking underground storage tanks, and oil and gas wells. So that's all, it's in the model now. So then that was a direct result of commission's input 2 years ago. So thank you for that. In terms of microplastics, that is not in this model. We don't have that level of detail to do that. We do have total suspended solids in here, which Rick measures regularly. Microplastics. Well, situation with microplastics isn't good. I've been monitoring it this past summer and the summer before. Taking samples this summer in particular, I took samples in Ann Arbor in particular because from my 2019, I learned that the vast majority of microplastics seem to be coming from these small tributaries. Miller's Creek, Swift Run, or by far the farthest, or the biggest source of all over the Huron River watershed. So I spent my 2020 looking more specifically at those hot spots. I haven't been through all that data yet. It takes a long time, and the season just ended. So now I'm sitting down with a microscope counting plastic pieces, basically. And you know, there's a lot of plastic, and I'm having a hard time figuring out what the source is. It doesn't seem like it is wastewater treatment plants, which is what the vast majority of the literature out there says. Because I'm finding it's coming from these small little tributaries that aren't connected to the wastewater treatment plants at all. Like there's no connection there. So where is it coming from? That's my question that I want to answer. And so like we're working on it. My prevailing theory right now is that there is just a lot of atmospheric deposition of plastics. And it could be the reality that we just can't do anything about it at the end of the day. I think people are burning trash all over the world, you know, and these small little pieces are just landing everywhere. We happen to see a lot of them in Arbor because they're being scattered across the entire watershed, but they're getting washed off streets and impervious surface through storms, and then they're collecting in the streams. I mean, they're probably everywhere in forests and fields too, but they're going to be more settled into the soils as compared to in a city. They're going to be they're not settling into the asphalt. They're getting washed off into the creeks. So that's my prevailing theory with very little evidence besides just reading a lot and a little bit of sampling, but something that I'm definitely interested in and I want to keep looking at.
Have you?
What about swimming, Paul? Is that even within
the bacteria thing? So E. coli is definitely going down in Ann Arbor. We still tell everyone who asks, 48 hours after major rainstorm, what's a major rainstorm? We started saying this past year, we were like, okay, we got to come up with a number for that to give some guidance. So we're saying after a half an inch of rain, wait 48 hours before you go into the water. I would like to see better communication about that because I feel like a lot of people want to know that. So that's a discussion to have at HRWC is how do we make this more broadly known? I tell everyone who asks. My wife is starting to tell all her friends who ask. So it's like it's passing word of mouth. But how do we just teach people this? Something to think about. Rick, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mentioned that we had a study that we were doing this summer that is actually part of a broader all Lake Erie drainages in the state of Michigan study that will have some broader numbers for basis of comparison on E. coli plus some bacterial source tracking, genetic fingerprinting. For that, and we'll have a better basis of comparison. But then I'm also really probing the Eagle staff representative who's done all the work for the state on this to help us give some better guidance on access and on use of these water resources that aren't officially swimming beaches. With swimming beaches, it's very easy. They test daily. If you get a hit, close the beach, and that's that. A lot of these waters, so they're not officially swimming beaches, so it's they're not testing regularly. So we have to give general guidance on what we know are the conditions in different types of stream flow situations. So we are working on that, and we're hoping we will be improving our messaging on that.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, thank you for all the work that you all are doing. I think it's fantastic as well. When we met with the city about possibly trying to make this system more visible to the public and being able to track that, one of their concerns was that you all had made your own kind of ranking system and that it wasn't comparable to other watersheds and streams in the state or in the country. And I'm just wondering, when you all created this, was that kind of part of how you thought about it? Or did you say, we just have all this really rich data, and so we just want to make our own because we have all this super rich data? Like, how did you all come up with the system that you had? And if you are aware of other systems out there, are there ways to be able to kind of mesh things so that we might have a possibility of being able to go down that road a little bit more easily?
Can I take a first shot at that, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a really good question, Shannon. We've been struggling with that for a few years, for a number of years, actually, and even coming up with the system to begin with. I think it's part of everything you said. First of all, I don't think there is a standard reporting. I've looked at, we obviously look at not all, but a lot of our sister organizations and watersheds out there and how they report on their data. And it is kind of across the board. I mean, it's all over the place. Some organizations focus on, just one or two things. Others aren't really doing a whole lot of science, and so they're reporting. They're doing kind of more advocacy stuff, and so there isn't really a standard for doing that. But there is some work in development right now. We're actually part of in the Lake Erie region in trying to coordinate some of the reporting, but then also some of the monitoring as well to standardize that across the board. Macroinvertebrates is actually fairly standard. It's one of the simpler things to train untrained volunteers to do. So there is some standardization across that. But a lot of our other data collection is fairly unique. Our chemistry program is unique in the state for sure, probably in the region. We've tried to train some other programs to do that, but we have this data and we want to incorporate it. So it is that too. It is that we have a richness of data here that a lot of other organizations don't have, and so we want to incorporate that to the best of our ability. And we're also following the science and the standards for those parameters. Paul indicated, that where we're setting our grades is based on existing standards where we have them, and then literature where we can find it. And then it's, best professional judgment when we get, to a point where we really can't make a choice on that. So it was a really sort of conscious process of how we're getting there. And it's now what we've really struggled with is how to express that, how to educate the public and get them to see the importance of that. I don't know that an index, and we've tried to keep it as simple as possible so that we can get that across in something like a sign. But it's a moving target. We hope to be moving these numbers and for it not to be stagnant. So we need to recognize that. And I don't know that everybody responds to indexes or grades as much as they do kind of like more image-based things and things that are more emotionally based. At least that's what I hear from our marketing team.
Yeah, like swimming.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's probably really important.
Yep. Basic goals, can you drink the water? Can we swim in the water? Can we fish?
Right. Is it okay if your dog drinks it? That
Yep.
kind of thing. Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense. Well, maybe there's an opportunity for you all to lead in this category. If you all are really, kind of gathering all the best practices and putting things forward and trying to come up with your own system. And maybe that's a new grant opportunity to be able to kind of figure out some standards for a bigger, because, where are we with this stuff if we can't really have some sense of where we are within the context of others? So if you all are rocking it, then maybe it's a way for you all to think about leading others or creating systems for others, because I just think the work you're doing is excellent, and I would love to be able to see it get bigger. So.
Can the Environmental Commission help in any regard? I mean, advocating that eagle, or I don't know, Laura Rubin in her new position, whether she can advocate for something like this. That I agree entirely with Shannon. Best practices and lessons learned should be shared, and the wheel should not be reinvented. The wheel should be copied all over the place. We'll
Yeah.
nominate you for the Biden administration and a position in the EPA or something like that.
Great. Well, like I said, I didn't go into a whole lot of detail, but there is an Erie-wide group that has formed that is working on that from two ends. There is a developing database even where we're trying to standardize, data that can get into that, and then how it gets scored and expressed, as well as some of the standards on the monitoring that is taking place. So it's really at early stages, but it's great to see the discussion, and we've been part of that, and we've been recognized in this way too. It's like, oh, you guys are the only ones doing that. So how do you do that? And what kind of training do you need to get that implemented? So, it's really good to see that, but then also the burden's on us to, to make sure, or to try to get it done right, throughout the field, so that, we can have really good comparisons.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Just real quick, I wanted to add my thanks for a very informative presentation. And is the full plan for the middle section available publicly, or are you waiting for Eagle's final approval? Okay.
Yep. Next week, I anticipate they'll give us their signatures, and then we'll be able to widely distribute it. Yeah, thanks for your interest.
Yeah, I'm sure we'd all love to have a copy of that as soon as it's available. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, could you notify us?
Definitely.
Okay. Any other questions? I had one question, and that is, there's been a lot of development, for example, like around the Nixon Road corridor in the last 10, 20 years. Is your monitoring of the creek, which I assume that's Miller's Creek mostly, but maybe partly Traver Creek? I don't know. But have you seen any indication that the management practices at these construction sites, or the addition of the impervious surfaces, has that affected the water quality in that creek shed noticeably?
I can speak to sediments, which is usually what we're looking for from construction sites. And unfortunately for this year, because of COVID, we weren't able to conduct our normal regular program throughout the season starting in April. So we really didn't even get started monitoring until mid-June. And that was limited at best. We had to scale back a fair bit. So it was a little bit harder for us to detect what we normally would. We have had cases, we have had incidents where we have observed like large increases in sediment in one creek that weren't experienced elsewhere. And we were able to track that down working with the local municipality. But not like, I'm not pointing directly to the Nixon development. So in the past, we've been able to see some of that. But I can't say that we found anything with that particular development.
Okay, I was just using that as an example. I mean, I was wondering if, this is some of these data that you're acquiring is useful, very useful, for monitoring the success of these, because as far as I can tell, the regulatory agencies don't really monitor that. They just implement some rules and just check to see if things are done, but they don't actually monitor the effectiveness, I believe.
That's true. That's true. And we have had, like I was saying, we've had a number of incidences where we found some issues that, there's nobody really in the stream watching us. The good thing is that we have pretty good, pretty decent stormwater regulations. And as I mentioned, the city has a really good stormwater management system. So when we find anything in the system, we can get the word out to that immediately, and then there's a response. We usually have a response within an hour or two to some observation that our samplers have made. When it's in the city of Ann Arbor, it's a little bit slower when it's in some of the other municipalities, but the city does a really good job with that.
That's great. That's great to hear. Okay. Did you have a good collaboration with the city about this?
Yes, and they have, you know, they regulate the construction projects. They have to do certain procedures, and they have to get permits, you know, for during construction and post construction, as you know, and Jerry's reviewed tons of those. So whenever there's a problem, there's a violation, and then, you know, actions can be taken to get it remedied.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, well, thanks very much. It's a world-class organization. I myself participated in the Stonefly essays for 4 years straight, and it was a wonderful opportunity to educate the public school kids as well, you know, in stream health. And so that was one of the best environmental education programs I knew of in the Ann Arbor area. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Appreciate it.
Okay. So so let's see. I know the the Gelman plume was put into the special presentations category, but I would really think it's more appropriate for new business. So I'm wondering if we should move it there. And what we'll do is I'll go directly to the public commentary and the unfinished business, and then at new business we'll have that discussion. Is that agreeable with everybody? Okay. All right. So I'm going to begin the public commentary. This is an opportunity for persons to speak up for up to 3 minutes. Please call either 213-338-8477 or 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Be patient. There is a delay of up to 30 seconds before a connection is established. I'm going to read the numbers again. It's 213-338-8477 or 206-337-9723. And enter meeting ID 924-5796-9823. So we'll be waiting 30 seconds for anybody to pop up here. I think that's it. So,
there are no calls.
No calls? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Galen. So let's move on to unfinished business. I'm going to mention a few things we've learned. First of all, in the city attorney's office, Chris Frost has mentioned that the bylaw drafts, the bylaws that we talked about last month, they're not quite finished yet. The main thing was incorporating youth commissioners, and Rita brought up a good point about that would probably change our quorum number. If we have 2 more voting commissioners, we need to change the quorum number. And other than that, I think we're close to getting it by next month. So this would be on the October calendar. As far as the youth commissioner is concerned, I've been told that Lily Ferris was nominated to be our 2nd youth commissioner. It's on the council agenda on October 19th. So it won't come up to council until then, and then after that she can join us. So she could probably join us for the next meeting that we're going to have in October.
Who is Libby Ferris?
Lily Ferris, yeah.
Lily?
Lily Ferris, Lily. Her last name is spelled Faris. So,
She's a high school student? College student?
yes, she's a high school student, I believe, yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
I think she still is. I mean, this has taken so long. She started out as a high school student. For all I know, she's in college now. So, and then in terms of other things, there are, let's see. Let's see, Rita was supposed to send Shannon a draft of the Heritage Trees Ordinance, along with the list of trees. Has that happened? Shannon, did you get that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know, I haven't seen it.
Okay, well, let's remember to do that.
We had some discussion in the natural features group that we were still in process. So I kind of jumped the gun on my team when I said yes. And I think it's probably fair for us to at least go through it, our process one time at least first before we pass it around. That's the indulgence I'd ask.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, because I can't join the group tomorrow at noon because I have another commitment.
But we're doing fine. We got through the more or less final review. More discussion about the tree list, which will happen at our next meeting, either tomorrow or next Monday. But we're getting close, actually.
Okay. So, Chris,
for step one.
Wow.
Step one being changes to the ordinance that governs site planned projects.
Mm-hmm.
Step two is what to do about regulating trees generally that are being hurt widely in additions and landscaping projects around the city. And that's a more difficult lift and will take us some time to do once we get past step one.
Okay. So you'll work with Shannon directly about getting information to her and when it's appropriate.
Well, she's on the Natural Features Committee now, so she'll get it pretty promptly.
Okay, I didn't know I was on the committee.
You were on the Water Committee, so water and something else got pushed into Natural Features. So
no, well, John and I have a different one going, actually. So, but we can talk more about that later.
So it sounds like we got to get organized here a little bit better on the working group level. Okay. And then my understanding is that, Chris, you're working on a C's capstone project proposal.
Yes, I think that's likely to be out the door tomorrow after the meeting. I wanted Jason Talent to make sure that supporters were on board before we send it over to C's. And if they are, I hope he's at the meeting tomorrow and hope he says they are, and out the door it goes.
Sounds great. Okay. All righty. So that's all the unfinished business I know of right now. There are a few minor things, but let's proceed to new business then. And so you've all seen the about the Gelman plume. We've never really discussed that here because there was a consent judgment, so that there was no publicly available information about progress, particularly so. Now that the information was released for the fourth consent judgment, for the fourth amendment to the running consent judgment, the consent judgment's been going on since 1992. So this is the fourth amendment proposed for it. A lot of people in the community and different organizations have already said that it's inadequate. It's not an improvement. It's a step backward. So I thought it might be appropriate for this commission to consider this. And given the time pressures, I thought it would be good to bring it up now because I think the court, the court council has to make a decision about this by October 22nd, which is the court date. That's the drop dead deadline. So that's going to be before our next meeting. So I was thinking we would have enough time to discuss this and amend it and then possibly vote on it. If there are enough, enough people, enough commissioners that are agreeable to that when we're finished with the discussion. So has everybody had a chance to look at some of the information? I just included the, the 2-page summary by Matt Nod because I thought it was particularly informative, but you've seen all the official documents that are posted on the city's website. The city webpage. City has a page that describes the process for the city to engage into with the court on this consent judgment amendment. So I quickly drafted a resolution and put it up on the website. Has everybody seen it? Shall I try to share my screen and put it up there?
Steve, 2 questions. Yeah, if you could share that. I haven't seen anything. And whatever Matt Nod sent, you said it was attached. I couldn't get that attachment. I don't know what that, I'd be interested in seeing that too.
Yeah, there were different emails sent out. Hey, Galen?
Uh-huh.
Can you reattach both of those documents and email them to all the commissioners? Right
Sure.
now? And meanwhile, could you allow me to share my screen?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll make you the host.
Okay. So I'm going to pop them up on my screen. Let's try the Mad Nod one.
Okay. There you go. And then I'm going to get that out right now.
Okay. Thanks. So let's see. So what do I have to do further to share this? Can anybody see this?
It's going to take a second for it to pop up, but it should be a red box around it once it's shared.
Okay. I've never done this before. So
yep, I see it.
See this?
Mm-hmm.
So he includes a map, and Matt lives adjacent to this First Sister Lake, and so this was the major objection that was noticed in the community. That there was a proposal to dump 200 gallons per minute of extracted and treated groundwater into this lake. So this lake is, it's a wetland. It's the amount of water, there's still going to be dioxin in this groundwater, and there's still going to be additional bromate, bromate is a known human carcinogen that's involved in the treatment process. So if they're discharging 200 gallons per minute into First Sister Lake, that's equivalent to a 1-inch rainfall every day. Or 100 or a 1% event. Now, this.
That's not a 1% event, though, just so you realize.
Yeah.
A 1-inch.
A 1-inch.
100 year, 1% is a 100-year event, just so you understand.
Right. So, now this is an official natural area for the city, First Sister Lake. And it's also...
I'm sorry. That means it's off limits to do anything of the sort like this. That's totally ridiculous.
Yeah, that's what...
I'm being blunt, and I'm just absolutely appalled.
Yeah, and during the meetings, there's an Eagler representative, Mr. Lemke, who was involved with the CARD, the CARD group. And he wasn't able to provide any scientific data, no hydrology data or anything like that that would indicate what the potential for flooding was.
It's not flooding. It's contaminating a natural area.
And contaminating.
That's no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It may be flooding too and other things, but ecological changes on down the list, but you don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that here.
Yeah, they want to do that instead of piping the water somewhere else.
Sorry, Charlie.
Mm-hmm.
No.
So
There's no easy place though to take something like that. So just so we understand, water flows downhill and it has to go somewhere. And so I'm not saying I support this. I'm just saying that what do you do with it is
Good question.
a big important question.
Back to the drawing board.
It's usually piped to somewhere.
Somewhere below the sewage treatment plant would be good.
Yeah, it's usually.
But that's dumping it on IPSI is what I'm saying. It's like it goes somewhere is what I'm saying. So that's where it's a tough nut to crack is what I'm saying.
They could also treat it to a higher level of
that's right.
A lesser level of contamination.
That would be
You're overwhelming the ecosystem with so much water.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So
don't overwhelm the Huron River this much water.
So I saw many reasons for this. So I think I'd like to give everybody enough time to look over some of these comments and see what they understand about it and have a brief discussion about it. So otherwise I can just pop up the draft resolution and we can discuss that. Because I drafted it based on a lot of the points that I've heard within the community and from Matt Nodd's paper here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So why don't I just, hello?
The emails came through, so I think everybody should have it. I just have a basic question about process. I don't know if anybody can help me understand this. Why is this happening now? Was the previous one time limited and it had to be reviewed, or is this being driven by a particular stakeholder? Can anybody explain kind of why this is happening?
Anybody want to weigh in on that, Rita?
The city and Scioto Township and the county requested getting involved, and there was a lawsuit. Now I can't quite explain the lawsuit or the potential lawsuit, but the result was to develop this consent agreement, and it's taken at least 3 years. Steve references 4 years in the resolution. It's taken a long time, and until about 2.5 weeks ago, there was none of this information made available to the public, and our elected officials were constrained from talking about it publicly. So there's been very little public information about what this process is.
Yep. I understand that. I guess what I'm struggling with is that after all of that, and not just me, but many are saying is like, this is all we got.
Right.
And it's like, what was all this effort for? If it's even taking us back steps.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's even worse is part of the agreement would be that we renounce any ability to change it further.
And we cannot go to the EPA. We cannot appeal to the EPA for further cleanup.
Yeah, I also don't understand how this is the result of years of effort, and like, what are we missing? If there's a case to be made for approving this, I'd like someone to make it to us, because this is just baffling. I mean, are there implications to denying this that aren't obvious, or I just don't understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really unfortunate that we were meeting tonight because we could have also participated in the meeting with the city council and the county commissioners in which
Yeah.
they had an opportunity to talk with the consultant Larry Lemke and others. So that would have been a great opportunity to have your question answered. I know I can't answer it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of
Sent us an email saying that he was going to try to jump over to our meeting after the other one's over, but it could be that it's still running.
No, it's not over. It's not running now.
It's not.
So who was that?
That was Chip Smith. He was attending it, as Ann was as well.
Right.
I mean, yes, to hear
I
from
know I kind of had it going on the side and it's finished.
Can I toss an idea out that I'm not even sure I'm in favor of, but I think we're all so baffled by this, and it seems truly terrible. And we could go ahead and vote, but might it be worth calling a special meeting of the commission in a couple weeks to try to get some of our questions answered before voting?
Yeah, Bob. I mean, that same thought occurred to me. I was going to raise that, as well. I think that this may warrant having a special meeting so we have enough time to digest this. And I would maybe have it in a week or two, maybe just in a week.
I think a week. That's what I would like. I feel like we need to move quickly because I think that council is being pressed. Council and the commission are being pressed to respond.
Yeah, so I think a week.
And I can't answer why, why the speed.
So yeah, I can understand that. So, I know the Scioto Township has met already and they have rejected it. So has Ann Arbor Township Board has rejected it.
I don't think that Scioto made a decision. That was a presentation and discussion. There was not a vote.
Yeah,
on Monday.
I heard a rumor that they had, but I haven't seen the official.
I haven't heard that.
So yeah, I shouldn't have said that. So let me try to set up a special meeting for the commission for next Thursday night. How about that? Does Thursdays work for most people? Otherwise, I can send out a when to meet. I'll just send out a when to meet anyway, and we'll see who can sign up. Okay.
Next Thursday is October 1st.
Yeah, because I just set up a meeting for them, but if you send out something, that would be great.
Well, yeah, I'll send out a when to meet, and so then we'll see when the best slot is, okay? And then I'll work with Galen.
Or I just may have to come late, and that's a possibility too, so.
Yeah, the other constraint is that, CTN. We can't just reserve a room now. We have to get CTN, to broadcast it.
And do we have to notice this, Galen? I don't know if you know that.
Yeah, we'll have to notice
probably
it.
I can definitely find out.
And you need 2 weeks to be able to notice it legally.
Really, 2 weeks?
2 weeks?
Two?
I can find out tomorrow for you and let you know in the morning.
Please do, so that we make sure that we're staying within bounds.
Yeah.
So I'd really be interested to understand the decision-making process.
I think it's only
deciding whether this goes forward in this form or not, and what appeal process is there, if there is one? Are we just whistling Dixie here, or what?
There is no appeals, Chris. After this, if this is agreed on by the elected officials, there's no appeal. It's done.
And the
It's
elected
done.
officials are a majority of all the various.
Well, oh no. So here's the question that I don't know the answer to. There is the involvement of Judge Tim O'Connor, and I don't understand because there's a vote by the elected officials and there's also the judge involvement. So I don't understand the relationship there. I can't. I
believe the judge himself makes the decision on his own, based on what he hears from public input and the different, parties to the suit, to the original suit.
That wouldn't be good.
No, that would be horrible.
But probably so. This is a court case and the judge rules.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve, before you send out the when to meet, why don't you wait and find out about what the public meeting notice requirement is, not that you have to do it twice.
Yeah, I believe it's only 48 hours.
I think that's right too. It's in our bylaws, right? And I just read those.
I think the planning commission is under its own, is under more severe restraint.
That could be, just check on it just to make sure.
Oh yeah, that's essential.
So
Definitely check it out.
I would like to suggest that we all look at the reference information that's on the city website that includes the actual documents that are being requested to be approved by the elected officials, the whole consent judgment, and there are a series of videos by Larry Lemke, 7 of them. So there's, in addition to that official stuff, there was an excellent presentation by Roger Rail and Dan Bicknell, who have both followed this for the 30 plus years since it's been discovered. Dan actually discovered the pollution in the first place, and Roger Rail has followed and collected data over time. But they made some really good points in the Scioto Township meeting. I sent that link out earlier this week. It's really worth watching. That is only an hour. I don't know the total time of Larry Lemke's videos.
Yep, and so I think with this special meeting that we have, I think it would be prudent to invite some members from CARD and possibly Matt Nod, and then he can come and answer questions. Okay.
We might want to invite Roger Rail and Dan Bicknell as well.
That's what I meant.
Consider that.
Well, I would send the invitation to CARD, and then they can decide who to send as the representative. Okay, that's the way I think I'd like to do it.
And to Bob Needham's point, is there someone then that would try to make the pro argument?
I have not heard any pro arguments of that.
Yeah. Well, I think my only point is I think Bob's right. It would be interesting to hear it, to see if it holds any water whatsoever, or if there, and to your point, if there isn't anyone, then that's pretty telling.
Yeah, I mean, if no one's in favor of this, where did it come from?
Yeah.
So we may want to talk to Ann and Chip, because they just had this meeting, and because this was a big deal. This was with Debbie Dingle tonight. And she was involved with getting the parties together in the first place. So
yeah, that's something that's worth mentioning. Is I went to the first meeting that was hosted by Debbie Dingle on this. Yep. It was over a year ago.
2 years ago, at least 2 years ago.
Yeah, because just getting all these parties together was that big a problem. But she got involved, and one thing I remember her saying is that, you don't have to do what the lawyers tell you to do, because they don't always know what the community concerns are and what the technical issues are. So that's the only thought I could have about how this was negotiated. It just wasn't. They didn't have the right people in the room. It's one of these situations where they didn't have the right people in the room. So. But be that as it may, we'll see at the next meeting. The goal will be to see what the problems are, whether there's any hope in addressing them, and then finish a resolution to council recommending a course of action. That may involve total rejection. That may involve a few suggestions for correcting it to make it more acceptable. But we'll see. We'll see what the determination is. Okay.
I have a question about the draft that you did, Steve, which I really appreciate. I'm very happy that you responded in this way. Is it something that's static right now because it's on our review, or is it possible to make any changes at this?
It's a draft. It's just a starting document. It will be amended. As the usual process, within the commission during the discussion. People will propose amendments, they'll second them, they'll vote on them, we'll have them put in there. And then when we get a final resolution, we'll vote on it. And if it's got a majority, it'll pass. But if it's unanimous, it sends a stronger message. Right?
Why can't we vote? We have 9 here. Why can't we vote on this resolution right now?
I feel like I haven't, I mean, I am heading in a direction, but I just have not had time to even look at this. I feel like I'm not prepared to vote. This just came at us. We just got things in email. It's an hour past when we're typically supposed to stop. So I'm not ready. I mean, I think we're of a similar mindset, but I feel like I want to learn more about this. And I feel like if we just pass a resolution, then we're sort of done. And I feel like it needs to be, we need to, a part of our job is to review these things and really get them. And if the resolution is just coming at us, that I feel like we're not doing our due diligence.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with that as well. I want everybody, this is an educatable moment for a lot of people. So we
assuming we do get to educate and it doesn't go past us and we're sitting back here watching.
Right. I just want to say that I see both sides on this. My preference would be to proceed, but I have read some of the documents. If you read even just the Ann Arbor, the specific document, which I could point out to you if I saw the name of it, but it's on the city's website. Just read it. We're not lawyers. I think you'll see the points.
Yeah, it won't take much time. So I'm going to start trying to schedule something for Monday through Thursday. Okay. And we'll see when the web best slot is, and we'll get at least a quorum there, and we'll see what, and I'll try to make sure that Chip and Ann are both there.
And you might seek their guidance ahead of time too, to see if there's any greater sense or lesser sense of urgency, or better their recommendation on how to go about this.
Yeah, well, the drop dead date is October 22nd. So we're going to have a special meeting to address it, and the sooner the better.
I'm truly offended. I've known Matt Nod for 20 years. His testimony is golden. This is not good.
Yeah, that's why I selected that to share with everybody. And it's pretty thorough. A pretty thorough job and very well informed. So I'm sure CARD can do just as good a job. So we'll see what they can say, and I'll try to reduce the redundancy there. Okay, because we need to have time for discussion, not just for presentations. Okay. Okay, so do I have a motion to table this until a meeting next week before Thursday?
Second.
All in favor, vote aye.
Okay.
Aye.
ASAP.
Okay, any no votes? Speak up. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing that. So everybody has a email copy of this now. So let's look over it, and I will send when to meet thing tonight or first thing in the morning, and so we'll plan on scheduling this special meeting for before next Thursday. Hopefully we can get it done within 2 hours. I think we could probably get it done in an hour and a half. I'm not sure of any new business. I don't think there is any more. So let's go directly to reports from other committees. Anything from the Natural Features Committee?
Meeting tomorrow at noon, working on the final steps of the step one of the changes to UDC to protect heritage trees, do more protection for trees, and not just categorizing heritage trees, big guys and so on, but it's a number of minor changes that would impact how soils don't get compacted on construction sites and so on. A number of changes to definitions, some new definitions, and I hopefully will finalize the proposal to the School of Natural Resources to help us get a better woodland map of the city.
Right, a tree canopy.
Right, and the floodplain and floodway stuff will be presented to us tomorrow as well. Floodways and floodplains and watercourses are natural features.
Okay.
So Jerry's work over this last decade on that stuff is very impressive.
Okay. Okay, Chris. Well, do you think you'll be ready to? We were going to devote most of the October meeting to your work group for bringing all this to the full commission in detail and.
Yes, I don't know that it'll take a whole meeting. Let me think about what else besides those things to do for you. This idea of reaching out and trying to stimulate the community to do better stewardship of its landscapes. Is probably as valuable and important and energizing and exciting to many people as was our original request to acknowledge, understand, identify, and remove invasive species, which happened beginning about 1990 and was greatly accelerated by the advent of the Natural Areas Program and their outreach educational materials. And hopefully in another 20 years, we are growing trees and more native plants and less turf grass by far than we are today. So maybe there's room in that meeting to talk about that.
Okay, yeah, no, I hope so as well. Okay, so the other committee, well, they're working groups really. You know, there's the solid waste working group. We'll meet next week again. We're making slow progress on our goals, but it's going to be difficult to get much done until after the election, I think, after the holidays. How about the water working group?
Well, it's really part of natural features now, but anyway, it's what we spent most of this meeting on is the main things.
That's right. Okay. So so then other commissions.
So before you move on to that, can I just tell you about this other one that has been meeting, but we just haven't talked about it? I had mentioned it. If you're okay with me interrupting, before you move on to other commissions. I had expressed interest a couple of months ago about really looking at our code, our UDC, our Unified Development Code, as it relates to the 2030 carbon neutrality goals. And so John and I are working on that together, and we are assembling a group. I've done several interviews with different experts in the area. And so we are putting that together right now and thinking about how we can tweak things and align things to be able to feel like we're moving in the same direction and we're not moving at cross purposes. So we've been working on that, and we'll keep you posted. We need a name, John.
Well, you and John Mursky have been working on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not part of the planning commission now, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think for the December 3rd meeting, I want to have revisit the whole work group arrangement, and just see if it's working, optimally. All right. So what about the Energy Commission, and then we'll go to the Planning Commission and then the Parks Commission.
Very briefly, the Energy Commission is still basically getting structured. We have roughly 19 projects that we're working on in 4 working groups. We have liaisons from city, from OSI staff to each one of the working groups. We had a meeting this afternoon with staff and myself and Carlene. But in terms of really significant updates, really nothing other than the EV readiness ordinance is supposed to be considered by council on October what it is, I think 19th, does that sound right, as a Monday? Sometime, let's see, I'll tell you in a second. Yeah, 19th. So that's it.
Okay, planning.
Well, we looked at the floodplain ordinance, which we looked at today also, so I won't belabor that. And determined actually to have another public input session, because the first one was like very well attended, had a lot of questions, and more people are interested. So that's, I think, going to happen again. And then the only other thing I guess I would say is that we had plan come before us, a PUD over the old Lockwood project, which was on one of the sister lakes and now is out on Eisenhower. And we just had to make some hard choices, I think, about supporting affordable housing, whether we could kind of push the envelope with green things and with affordable housing at the same time, and having to really think about just the realities of what we can ask for in terms of a PUD, and trying to figure out that whole balancing act. And they're twin goals that are super important, and it's hard to have them happen in a robust way on both fronts. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of going down one road, and actually I kind of reined it in a little bit, because I felt like it's just difficult to be able to make both those. From my own experience as a designer, it's difficult to make both of those very robust. And the affordable housing component was really strong in this one. It was not a token. It was really built around it as a big, meaningful chunk. Anyway, so just in terms of trends, I would say that that's something that I think that we should just be aware of, that these are both important goals for the city, and that we just need to be aware about how much we can demand when there's a PUD involved. So that's what I would just leave you all with.
Okay. All right, thanks. And Mike, Parks Committee?
One of the things that we spent the most time talking about in the last meeting was the North Side Food Forest, which is an interesting question about what we end up using parkland for. Over the course of the coronavirus, a group of people organized and began planting perennials and food crops in Leslie Park without any permission previously from any of the anybody in the Parks Department. So this is challenging. As a PAC commissioner, I've received dozens of letters in support of the North Side Food Forest. Nobody has offered any great suggestions on what this says about process and how we decide what happens in parks. So it's a little bit of a challenging situation. We'll hear more about it at the next meeting. Yeah, certainly people are enthusiastic about the notion of perennial plantings in parks to be able to produce food. It fits in with a lot of the city's goals. And we also, as people that are supporting parks and trying to protect parks, have a lot of questions about what happens if we set precedents that let people just sort of blast into parks and start to do things that they want to do.
Amen. Is there a role for Project Grow in this?
All of those things are on the table. So like I say, if you're really curious about this, stay tuned to the PAC meeting next month, and we'll hear a lot more about some of the potential people that might be able to come in and help keep this thing going or provide a certain amount of longevity for it.
Okay. I think, one of the things that came up with the 820 plan was how about planting fruit trees in the easement, and the extensions between the sidewalks and the streets. I know a lot of people object because of the fallen fruit, hitting their cars that are parked and things like that. But that's something that a lot of communities have. Yeah,
it's something right now that if you do that you get dinged on your site plan review. So
yeah.
Just so you're aware of that.
So, Mike, Were the plantings at Leslie in the old Project Grove planting site? Below the Leslie Science building itself?
No, that's Leslie Science Center. Leslie Park is accessible behind Arrowwood or off of Duvaren and off of Leslie Park Circle.
So there are forest?
There are 3 different parks named Leslie up there. There's the Leslie Science Center, there's the Leslie Golf Course, and then there's also Leslie Park. And this all happened in Leslie Park.
In the forest?
In a place where it used to be some turf grass. And unlike the other food forest that's been built over in Burr Park, there have also been raised beds that have been constructed, and also rock forms placed in the ground. So it raises other questions about what happens if somebody does stop maintaining this. So yeah, like I say, questions, no answers really yet. But if you're curious about what's going to happen, I'll probably be able to tell you more next month.
How are we coming on the contamination at Leslie Park itself, the homestead?
Done. So they have wrapped that project up, and it is remediated. So that was exciting news as well.
Good.
Yeah.
I also just chimed in more regarding we approved some money for going ahead with a redesign at Argo Park. And once again, I chimed in and said, hey, it's very important to the Environmental Commission to be able to get some signage and educational materials down here. What that signage is, I don't know what it would be, but try to keep this in mind as this redesign moves ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to comment that I've some experience with a food forest that did not have identified ongoing maintenance, and it is an issue that needs to be considered if it's going to be supported in the future. And also, I think setting people's expectations about who gets the food.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't know how that's determined.
Last question is, Dave Borneman informed and coming and involved in how his management of that natural area relates to what's going on?
Well, that portion of Leslie Park is definitely not a natural area at all. The place where people have planted the food forest was just turf grass.
Okay.
They've also come up with a plan about how they'd like to use the site and a structure that they'd like to build in the park to be able to support the environmental education efforts associated with the food forest. So it's it was a very deep reaching plan that didn't necessarily involve, I guess, us as stakeholders and sort of the public that also
owns the property.
Yeah. So yeah, we're really trying to balance how we can be supportive to community needs up there, and see what the ability is of people that are in that neighborhood to have food plots, and make sure that need is being met, and really try to address that. But also, the sort of precedent is is a big question here.
Yeah.
And Rita, if you want to chime in to Pack about your experience with these things, it would help to temper some of the discussion a little bit, because I think those of us that have managed land before, and all the people that are on park staff are sort of like, oh, what does this mean? But everybody really thinks it's a good idea because conceptually, it's great. And how the shovel hits the dirt here, and particularly over the next years, really has a lot to do with the success of this project.
I think the long-term thing is the big deal. And you might want to also consult with Janine Palms about the Burr Park food forest, which I've not visited. I'd love to see it.
I haven't seen it for a few years, and it was coming along, and is very beloved, I know, by the people that are around Burr Park.
Yeah. So just another data point, our outreach to get more information.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I think the folks at the Food Forest thought that they were the first people that had this idea. So it was sort of interesting to be like, hey, you know, we've had one of these
Yeah.
with a memorandum of understanding with a group to be able
Yeah.
since 2010.
Yeah. I guess the other thing to think about is where does this fit in with a sustainability program? You know, and you know, it kind of sounds to me a little bit like what the group you're describing kind of almost sounds like the sustainability hub oriented thing with food added.
Yeah, there are lots of ways that what this project does meets many of the goals that the city is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there a semi-legal organization that's behind this that would have some permanence, you know, like a homeowners association or something?
Yeah, don't have any of that. We've got a website and we've got some motivated folks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, maybe you guys can develop a mechanism where people can do this, and you know, and provide a pathway for that is sustainable. Okay. So, well, that's interesting. So, the council members are not here. So, as the chair, given the hour, I don't really have anything that important to report that hasn't been talked about yet. So, report from staff. Galen?
Taking
Galen?
myself off. Yes, I'm taking myself off mute. Got a good update for you guys. I'm gonna turn my video on. Okay, right now we're in the Office of Sustainability and Innovation. We're currently shooting a PSA entitled "I Have a Vision." We've shot some background footage this week. Next week, we have some more shots to take, and then also we'll be doing recording of residents speaking out the visions, and I can share it with the Environmental Commission. It's sort of like I Have a Dream, but it starts off I Have a Vision. And at the end of the footage or whatnot, at the end of the PSA, it will lead residents to join and become an ambassador. And our PSA is going to kick off our ambassadors course, which is going to start in November. That's going to be a 9-week training over different elements of sustainability, you know, and it's all going to be science-based. And we hope that, you know, giving those folks the information that they can go out and speak on 820 with their peers, churches, and other organizations that we don't reach. So we're hoping to get about 30 to 40 residents. We might get more than that because we chose November on purpose because we're like, okay, it'll be cold. People will probably be looking for things to do. And it'll be a good way to spend some time, you know, brushing up on your sustainability knowledge. So I'll definitely get that out to you guys. And, you know, if you got any feedback, let me know. But what's going to be coming is a syllabus and the I Have a Vision script that we put together. And that's my report.
Can I add just one thing, Stephen?
Yeah, go ahead.
That I forgot just to mention in terms of parks. And it is not necessarily directly related to environmental sustainability, but it does sort of capture the more diversity inclusion aspect of parks. Winchell Park, which is down behind St. Francis Church, we have recently discovered, somebody did a little research on who Winchell was, that this park was named after, and he was, I guess, a terrible eugenicist from the 1920s. So we are trying to figure out a way to figure out how we come up with a process to be able to rename this park in a way that better reflects Ann Arbor's values. So I just spread that as, you know, it's not necessarily directly environmentally related, but, you know, certainly doesn't lead to feelings of inclusion when you know about who the park is named after and how we might be able to change that to better reflect the community values a little bit more.
Okay, good. So let's move on to items for next agenda. I think it's in Chris's report here with the Natural Features Group. So please let us know what topics you want addressed and how much time you think we want to devote to each one, Chris, okay? Not
Yep.
right now,
Okay.
but, you know, but at least 2 weeks before the meeting.
That's next meeting.
Yeah, that's October 22nd. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Steve, I think there are a few other potential things. We'll have the bylaws, presumably.
Yeah, we'll have Lily Ferris. We'll have the bylaws.
And then there were the two things that we bumped from tonight for time concerns, which was City Council referred something to us having to do with vegetation, and I'm not even sure what that is.
Yeah, Ann Bannister and she wanted to talk about Chapter 40 of the Title 3 of the UDC.
Yeah, so that is hanging fire. And also OSI wanted to give us a presentation on their greenhouse gas inventory.
Yeah, I have that listed here. The Thea Jagerliner and Fang Wu will get probably 10 minutes each to talk about their efforts.
And I would also like to follow up on Jerry's presentation tonight. I'm planning to introduce a resolution just supporting his work and asking council to move forward with that ordinance.
Okay. So I just would like to point out that I don't know if we have any sensitivity to the date, but didn't we say out earlier that October 22nd is potentially when the Gelman plume might be addressed?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that has any bearing on our meeting, but I just want to raise it now so we don't run into another conflict.
Well, that's a court date, so presumably that's going to be during working hours.
Okay.
You know? So we may know something by then about what I doubt that we'll hear an official decision. You know, that's the court hearing. So it may be sometime before we get the judgment. So that's our next. So any other requests for items for the next agenda on October 22nd? Okay, yeah, it looks pretty full. So, and then the other scheduled meeting, which is not yet scheduled, will be to be determined, and I will schedule it for before Thursday next week, okay? Monday through Thursday. And so I'll send out a when to meet again, and we'll all weigh in on it, and I'll pick the most appropriate the date, the time when everybody's available, that we can also, you know, conform to the Open Meetings Act and CTM, okay? Availability. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the public commentary. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call either 213-338-8477 or 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID number 993-3216-0566. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. Be patient, there is a delay of up to 30 seconds before connection is established. So if you want to make a comment, please initiate the phone call now.
Hey, Steve, while we're waiting, some people might be interested in an interesting development. The International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers has stepped forward and at the city's dedication of the solar and storage facility, the resiliency facility at Northwoods, and said that their understanding of the state law is that licensed electricians have to do 100% of the work associated with solar installations. So because a solar panel is an electrical device, even carrying it up on the roof, bolting it down, plugging it in, that all has to be done by a licensed electrician. And so that would be rather dramatic shift to that whole business in the state of Michigan.
Mhm.
So that I don't think we need to talk any more about it, but it's a big issue right now, as you might imagine.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's no one from public comments.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Galen. So that ends the period of public comment. Do we have a motion for adjournment? First starts Shannon, and then Christopher seconds it. So everybody who agrees, say aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, so I declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Good job, Stephen.